Welcome to this Meyer educational video, providing business solutions and bright ideas. Today, we will be demonstrating the migration and transition process for leased assets within PeopleSoft. The migration portion moves leased asset data into the lease administration module for lease tracking. The transition portion will bring your organization into compliance with the new lease accounting standards outlined in ASC 842. Let's navigate to the guided migration and transition process by selecting Asset Management, Asset Transactions, Leased Assets, Migration and Transition. This takes us to the Activity Summary page. Let's begin the migration and transition process by selecting Start Migration Tasks. We begin this process with the initial assessment of asset management. The first step in this process is to review a report of AM leases to migrate into lease administration. This report consists of a count and detailed listing of all leases to migrate. Next, we will be updating the square footage and other property-related attributes on your leased assets. During this step, you will be updating unit of measure, usable area, rentable area, and occupancy date. Save your work and continue on to the next set of tasks. The pre-migration configuration starts with setting up lease amendment types, payment schedules, routing codes, and lease administration business units. Here is an example of a lease administration business unit. On the General tab, we assign the business unit mapping as part of lease administration's integration with other PeopleSoft modules. General Ledger Business Unit, Asset Management Business Unit, and Accounts Payable Business Unit are all required in order to configure the lease administration business unit correctly. The Transaction Settings page is where you set the transaction codes related to all of your lease transactions. On the Options and Critical Dates tab, you can select to apply certain lease options as a default. Next, we will configure new role types. Two key roles are the lease administrator and portfolio manager. Each lease will require a user or users assigned in these roles. Now, we will click on Assign Lease Administration Roles. This step is used to assign the newly created roles to specific PeopleSoft user IDs. Before we process any further with the pre-migration configuration, we must process any open asset management transactions related to the leased assets that we are planning to migrate. This can be completed in the Asset Management Work Center. Now we will assign our lease administration business units to our asset management leases. Click Search to pull up a list of active leased assets. Scroll down to view your results and populate the Lease Administration Business Unit field on each lease. Next, you will update the default values for new leases on the Identified Defaults for New Lease Attributes page. The next step will allow you to update new lease attributes en masse. These attributes are lease type, region code, lease administrator, portfolio manager, and lessor ID. Next, we will start the migration process tasks. First, we will run the data migration process. Set up a new run control. We named ours Lease Migration. Select Run to start the migration process. Once the migration process has completed processing, you can review the post-migration report. Next, You will review migrated leases and payment schedules. This concludes the migration process. Now we will prepare our transition to the new lease accounting standard. Let's begin by selecting a transition date. Please choose this date carefully, as any lease rent payments on or after this date will be capitalized as the right-of-use asset. Next, we will review existing miscellaneous rent configuration. Here are some examples. Now let's review existing operating expenses. Here are some examples. For our next step, we will review leases with multiple operating expenses and overlapping payments. Overlapping payments will require separate pay groups, and any gaps in payment dates will need to be corrected before proceeding. Now we will create non-depreciable asset categories for our operating leases. In this example, we have set up an operating lease category for buildings. You must set the depreciable status to non-depreciable and check the leased asset checkbox under Options. If you do not have a finance lease category already configured, now would be the time to set these up as well. Now we will set up capitalized asset profiles for operating leases. Here is an example of an operating lease profile for a building. If you do not have a finance lease profile already configured, now would be the time to set these up as well. Next, we will update the asset profiles and categories on our operating leases. Type in the Lease Administration business unit. Click Search, and populate the new profile and category on each leased asset. Now we will define our incremental borrowing rates, update interest rates on our operating leases, update advanced arrears payments section, run the transition operating analytic for operating leases, review the transition analytic, and finally, review a report identifying leases to transition. Now we are ready to transition to the new lease accounting standard. By checking the Apply ASC 842 and IFRS 16 accounting checkbox, we will apply the new lease accounting standard. Please note that once this box is checked, it cannot be unchecked. Click Save and confirm your transition to the new accounting standard. We are now transitioned to the new accounting standard. Next, we will need to create new asset management cost types. For lease administration, you will need to set up a cost type for rent expense, lease incentive, and lease remeasurement. A portion of leases will be processed within asset management. In order to properly account for items like rent expense and amortization, we will have to set up accounting entry templates. We will update the cost distribution for our operating leases. Now, we will run a process to capitalize our leases in asset management. Set up a new run control by selecting Add a new value. In this example, we name our run control CAP_OP_lease. Click Add to bring up the new run control. Using the search functionality, select the leases to be capitalized and click Run. Once that process is completed, we will generate straight-line schedules for our operating leases. In this example, we name our run control OP_lease_STR_LN. Click Add to bring up the new run control. This process is run by business unit and can also be run by lease number as well. Click Run to start the process. Once this process has completed, your lease migration and transition has been completed. This PeopleSoft educational video was presented by Meyer. Meyer, creating business solutions with bright ideas.